that might be rare.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order of the CICAC for Monday, December 9th. First item we have on our agenda is approval of the minutes from September 30th. Before a motion, I will let you know that our chair, Karen, did call me last week and asked me to chair the meeting. She also asked that we continue this item. There are some concerns she had with how the meeting was summarized. So if everyone is okay with waiting until our next meeting to approve those minutes, that would be appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we continue approval of the minutes for the September meeting until the next meeting.
A motion by Mr. Brown.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wardle. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Item number 2, Director Wong, you're up.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And first off, let me say thank you again for taking your time. I know that we compensate you with thousands of dollars for spending time to advise the commission on the items that are in front of you. I wanted to speak with you for a couple minutes today to clear up an issue or maybe settle an issue that's been brought to my attention regarding discussions that you've had in previous meetings regarding a countywide impact fee versus going to a specific area impact fee issue. You're going to receive a presentation today that we will be giving our commissioners Wednesday. Time flies when the Christmas season, isn't it? That we also shared with our commercial developers here last week, and we are going to make a recommendation to the commission regarding CIP and impact fees and such, and it's going to be their call. But I want to make sure you understood what the staff's perspective is right now, and that is we are a regional highway district. We are not a city specific, nor an area specific, nor a county specific, or a town hall specific area. We are not making any type of recommendation to go anywhere to get away from the countywide standard impact fee process. Now, we surfaced this and we shared this with the commissioners back in April. The commissioners at that time's direction was stay the course. I've shared that with the commission here the last couple weeks or two, getting ready for this one. There's been no indication from the commission that they have any desire, from a majority perspective, to change the perspective or the operations here at Ada County Highway District regarding how we assess and where we assess impact fees. So I wanted, if you want to have that continued discussion, that's great, but it's the staff's perspective is done on this. If you'd like to address as a majority group to the commission, you're more than welcome to attend any of the meetings on we have a public communications time frame on every meeting, and as the majority would like them to look at that, you can make that recommendation to them. But I just want to make sure you understand what the staff's perspective is, and so if you're going to have a discussion about it, it's not wasting your time, don't get me wrong, but that's done. And that's the presentation you'll see going forward. Now, that being said, that work session, you are more than welcome to come. We'll start the meeting at 12. We should be into the work session, I'm going to say probably 12:10. We don't have much on the regular agenda for Wednesday. You can be there, but it's up to the president's discretion as to whether or not she will allow discussion. Generally, we don't have a commentary from members of the audience during those time frames, but during the regular session, it's called public communications. If you believe as a group that the commission needs to look at that, that's the great time to bring that up. So I didn't want you to waste your time or to start talking about things with my staff that the staff has already vetted with the commission. And that's our presentation. That's our perspective going forward. And you'll get that in today's presentation from Mitch here. Now, we are making a recommendation, I won't spoil the surprise, to add one or two items to the commission's understanding, or its commission's direction to us for what's eligible for impact fee reimbursement and stuff, or pay, if you would. Now, as you know, this was a task by our commission to the staff during their budget process back in August, to come back to them after we had vetted this out with all sorts of different organizations, to make the recommendation as what we should do, or what they should do, or what they shouldn't do. We'll make that recommendation on Wednesday in the work session. It's an information only. They'll have to come back on the, if they want to take action on a regular agenda item and such. But at the end of the day, and I'm sorry I won't spoil too much of it, but we are looking at adding bridges, and we are looking at pathways. Everything else we're not. As a matter of fact, we are going to continue to make the recommendation to use miles traveled as the metric for impact fee operations. Our Commercial Developers Advisory Committee agreed with that and agreed with the recommendations that we're making across the board, because that impacts them a lot as to what the commission does. So with that being said, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to be here to share that with you and ask if you have any questions on those subjects for me.
I have a question.
Sure.
Director Wong,
I'm sorry.
John McDevitt.
Okay, Bruce Wong, nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Ada County's citizen representative.
Great.
So the CIP discussions that we've had, my understanding is that the 5-year update is what's before the commission right now, and that's what we're discussing here. That you said that there's been a recommendation that it be a regional-wide impact fee that.
No, it already is.
Yes, yeah, that's going to
Right.
stay the same.
Right.
So, so that 5, is it correct that that's the 5-year CIP update that we're discussing?
Yes.
And so, I
Plus
guess.
homework from what the commission gave us on the budget, on their budget decisions for the 2020 budget. They asked us to specifically go back and do a couple things. Number one, look at if there's any things we can add to or expand what impact fees can be used for, and then take a look at the CIP.
And because I'm new to this committee, has the CICAC committee already recommended that the CIP, as I guess I haven't seen a presentation of it, so I'm wondering if there's already been a recommendation that it be approved by the commission.
As soon as I'm done, you'll get that that presentation that Mitch is going to give you, which we will give the commission on Wednesday. And again, this group is a recommending body and such to the commission. And so again, if you have things that you'd like the commission to, my staff takes it to them, but I wanted to come in here and let you know on this specific issue regarding changing from a standard county-wide impact fee assessment. We're not going to do that from a staff perspective. That's been discussed and we're done. Now, the commission, a majority of the commission can change that, and that's up to them.
And I don't know that this would be the recommendation by this committee, but if the committee were to feel that a change in that approach of keeping the regional impact fee the same, after we hear a further presentation on that, if we want to have a more regional, city by city impact fee change, we make that recommendation. I guess that will be presented to the commission, but as you're saying, by your staff. So your staff would not recommend that approach be adopted. That's what I'm hearing you say.
My staff would take any kind of comments, whatever, to the commission, of course. That being said, the leadership of your group has every opportunity to speak to the commission directly during public communications, or if you'd like me to schedule a specific time during the agenda, during the regular session, where your leadership can make that majority presentation, more than happy to do that. That all being said, as of right now, today, we would not, the recommendation of the commission is stay the course.
Understood.
based on all the different groups we've talked to and all the different things that, because we do work with all sorts of folks.
Sure.
On establishing this. It's just not a internal, let's do this. So we found, we believe, for the best benefit for all folks here, the rules of engagement we have right now work incredibly well in ensuring a region-wide opportunity to work and improve a region-wide infrastructure. Yes, ma'am.
Ann Westcott, I represent citizen from Boise.
Okay, very good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My understanding, according to my understanding of impact fees, I personally totally agree with not having different geographic service areas. But the piece I need more information on is how part of our bylaws say we're supposed to be paying attention to inequities or perceived inequities. And while I don't personally see inequities geographically from city to city, I question whether or not residential development in dense areas could be in any city where it could be proven that they're less dependent on their cars. If we have data that can support that they have the same demand on the roadway system as more sprawling residential development, for example. I mean, obviously, commercial in the urban areas drives the need for trips from anywhere in the district. But if Meridian or Eagle or anyone's putting in a pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use development comp plan, do we have data that shows that those different types of land use or densities of land use have the same impact and therefore should pay the same fee?
I think that's something you should first take up with your city representatives. Not
I have.
passing the buck,
I have.
but at the end of the day,
I have.
they make those recommendations on land use strategy, and depending upon what side of the fence you're on, good or bad, the land use decisions drive transportation operations in today's environment and such. Now, that being said, how'd you get here today?
Right, I get all that. What I'm saying is, regardless of what land use is, even if the city weren't involved, Peter might build a large residential tower downtown with bike garages and all of
Sure.
that. He might say, this is clearly not putting as much impact, we're not generating as many trips out of the downtown as residential, in the county somewhere would in. I just wanna know if there's some data that shows that, because for years and years, what I've heard from developers is that's what makes it not equitable, and that's where I've heard the city say, well, we need service areas, and I personally say, no, you don't need service areas around geographical areas, you need to acknowledge whether or not data shows there's different demand, not by land use, but by a similar land use in a different area. So I've never seen that data.
Gary?
If I could help address that, there is
Then
a
I'll follow up.
process that developers can go through if they have data to show that they have a lesser demand, and that's the position that we're in. We use the best data available. If that isn't readily available to utilize in our fee tables in the ordinance, then there's a process that developers can use to present that data to us and have a individualized impact to be assessed at that time. But they need to prove that they are different and that they have a less impact on the system than the standard rates.
And we're very open to that. We do that, I think, more than most people realize. Now, that being said, I had a discussion a couple years ago with a developer, done a great job with a very specific type of development. And that developer's thought to us was, I'm containing everything here. I've got it all. We've got a grocery store, we've got a gas station, we've got schools. Everything's here in this development. Nobody has to, and a post office, nobody has to drive anywhere. Can you guys? My question to him was, great. How do you service it? Who brings in the food? Who brings in the gas? Do the teachers all live there and such? And the answer was, why no? I said, okay, a regional system. And such, even though this development is tremendous, it is absolutely tremendous, but there is a tremendous amount of trips generated. Even though, as you said, it was all in this sort of thing here, it really didn't matter. Now, as we move in the future, as things continue to change, there may be an opportunity at that point, but it's my perspective and my staff's perspective, no, not right now. Anything else?
So, Chairman, Director Wong, so from Ada County's perspective, we are the land use authority in Ada County and incorporated area, as well as, working with cities in the city comp plans and other issues. We were the ones that requested the service area based analysis or number or thought process, what was behind that. And at the last meeting, we did hear some numbers, but again, we did not get the qualitative discussion why we steered from one way or the other. And then the discussion came up of the fair and equitable, to expand the scope of impact fees a little bit. And I heard you say that you talked about bridges and pathways
Yes,
being added.
yes.
to the
Well, again, that's a
scope.
recommendation. That'll be up to the commission.
Right. And so the part that I did not follow was the use mile traveled as the.
Yes, the
Can you
impact fees
elaborate
are,
on that?
the impact fees are based on the amount of impact on vehicle miles traveled on the infrastructure. It is not based on bicycle or pedestrian, or we've looked at these things. And so our staff's recommendation and decision is to keep that as status quo. We have bounced that off again with other advisory groups that we deal with, and they have agreed to that moving forward. So in other words, when a developer builds something, we assess an impact fee based on the vehicle miles traveled or projected to be traveled that development causes. That's the impact fee that's paid. Impact on the road structure. Gary, did I get that right? Okay, thank you. I have the experts back there and they're gonna go, no. What the director meant to say was this, but that's what that means. And again, we'll be presenting that, as you'll see here in a little bit, but to our commission at the work session as an information update to them. And then at some point in time, we'll schedule a formal, Gary, when? July? Okay, and then they'll make their determination at that point. Anything else? Okay, I want to thank you again. Oh,
Thank you.
okay, I want to thank you again for letting me take some of your time, and I'll turn it back over to my staff. Thank you very much.
You let me know that Steve is unable
Oh,
to be here today.
yes, unfortunately, yes. He has an issue and such, so we'll go right into his presentation, right?
This has a lot about the impact fees
Right.
and what eligibility is, so you're gonna have a lot. Mitch will explain a lot, but Steve was unable, for other reasons to not be here tonight.
All right.
Alright, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Director for your presentation. Any questions? You have a decent sized presentation here. I'm gonna try to keep it as quickly as possible. So we have concluded our needs analysis for the 2020 CIP update. This is just a high level map for you to review. I think we had an attachment in the last meeting to kind of take a look at this. The intersections are under review for potential needs for those. This is all still subject to change as we continue through the CIP process, but this just gives you an idea of what we're looking at for the next plan. So these are kind of the three main topics we're trying to get through today. The first is impact fee eligibility, what is eligible, what's not eligible. We'll share some feedback we got from the Commercial Developers Advisory Committee just last week. And then finally, there are some action items that we'd like to talk through with you, and we this is all really exciting stuff to share with you guys. I did want to include some portions of Idaho code that are specific to impact fees, and this kind of sets the stage for the discussion on impact fee eligibility. Bear with me as I talk through a few of these. Feel free to chime in if you have questions at any time. So as the director mentioned, we do have a service unit, which is vehicle miles of travel, or 1 vehicle mile of travel. The service unit has to be a standardized measure of consumption, and it has to be attributable to the individual unit. The statute also defines, it has a whole list of items that cannot be considered what's called system improvements, which are the improvements we're able to use impact fees on. Essentially, that says that we can't use impact fees for improvements associated with existing development. Impact fees have to be calculated on the basis of level of service. They must be attributable to capacity demands generated by new development. And impact fees have to be for additional improvements to serve new growth. So those were some small snippets from the Idaho statute. It's called the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act. That's our sort of overarching guiding documentation on what we can consider impact fee eligibility. Unfortunately, it's not an exhaustive list that defines every component of public infrastructure that can be funded with impact fees, but it does give us some guidance as to what we can include in our impact fee plan for impact fee eligibility. The next bullet there is table C6, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like here in a minute. That is the table in our impact fee capital improvements plan that states, based on our interpretation of the statutory requirements, what we can spend those impact fees on. On August 21st, it was the hearing for our budget adoption. The commission made a motion related to our update to the capital improvement plan that's quoted on the screen. I'll read it briefly. Staff shall present to the commission a proposal to amend the current ACHD impact fee ordinance to include all impact fee eligible facilities that are currently authorized under the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act. We have done some work, and we've presented some of those options to the commercial developers group, and we'll share some of that with you today. This is a summary of what our table C6 from our current capital improvement plan looks like. Shows those items on the far left that are fully impact fee eligible. In the middle are the items that are partially eligible. For each of those items, we basically consider a percentage available based on the new capacity that's being added to a project. And then finally on the right are the items that are not impact fee eligible. And these are all based on our current understanding and our current interpretation of the Idaho statute. You'll notice that pedestrian crossings are on the far left and the far right. They're currently eligible if there's an existing pedestrian crossing that needs to be replaced or moved with a capital expansion project. We currently don't consider new pedestrian crossings as impact fee eligible items. We'll talk about that a little bit more further in the presentation, and that as a potential option to add to the eligibility. This, I do have an error. The numbers aren't showing, but down here it should read 70%, and up here it should read 30%. If we exclude everything from our current capital improvements plan, that is an existing deficiency. So it currently is a need, so therefore we cannot spend any impact fees on those projects. If we remove those projects, the rest of the capital improvements plan is 70% impact fee eligible, with 30% of those project costs not being eligible.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a clarification? Mitch, so on the last slide, when you showed the parts of a project that weren't eligible, that then would be part of the 30%?
That's correct.
Okay.
When you take those portions of project costs that you can't spend those funds on, that falls into that 30%. This is information that was presented to the commission on our sort of CIP kickoff with them, our initial meeting to say this is our approach to the 2020 CIP. The top two items are the ones I wanted to highlight. The director discussed the first one quite a bit. ACHD plans to maintain a single countywide service area and does not intend to go into multiple service areas with this update. And the second one is to maintain the system definition of arterials, or to continue to exclude collectors from impact fee eligibility, and I'll go into that here in a little bit more detail. Currently, ACHD exacts new collectors through development, so there's no cost to the district to add those new collector roads at this time. This statute also defines these two words on the second bullet, which are project improvements versus system improvements. We can only spend impact fees on system improvements or those projects that benefit the entire system. We consider collectors to be project improvements, or they help serve the individual development or the projects themselves. Improvements to existing collectors cannot be funded with impact fees, and that kind of goes back to some of the statutory snippets we listed, that improvements for existing development are not impact fee eligible. So going back to this is really similar to the slide you saw previously. We did present a couple items based on our review of the statutory requirements that could potentially be bumped up in impact fee eligibility. One of those items was new pedestrian crossings. Considering all pedestrian crossings, or signalized pedestrian crossings, I should clarify, as impact fee eligible. The commercial developers group was supportive of that idea. The other item we presented as including in our list of impact fee eligible items are all bridges. You see in the far left column here, we can use impact fee funds to pay for additional lanes, and that's including on bridges. But currently, if we have to rebuild a bridge, only the new lanes are impact fee eligible. Our sort of proposal or suggestion, or something we might consider, is to, even if we have to rebuild bridge, if the purpose of the project is to add new system capacity, and that is the only reason we're rebuilding the bridge, or in other words, it's not at its useful life or not at its design life, then we could include that as impact fee eligible. The feedback we got from the commercial developers group was they're generally supportive and understanding of that, but they want us to take into consideration where each bridge is at in its useful life. So if it's halfway through its useful life, then maybe half of those costs should still not be impact fee eligible. So that's something staff is going to continue to consider and work through as we go through this update.
I have a question on that before you go, but please. And specifically, I have in mind, I'm asking the question about the last entry on not eligible about transit and HOV lanes. And the best example that I want to allude to, in the long-range plan, in the plans for State Street, which is put together almost 20 years ago now, hard to believe, or at least 15. It calls for the outside lanes to be transit, or bus rapid transit. I assume that the actual building of those outer lanes, in other words, the additional asphalt and the right-of-way that's needed to be done, would actually be covered as fully eligible. In other words, it's the additional lanes. But the part that's not eligible is the special traffic control devices and markings and those kind of things. Or am I incorrect? Would that cover the actual construction of those outer lanes and including the traffic control devices?
Based on the way it's written right now, we can't include, if it's a dedicated transit or high occupancy vehicle lane, we would not be able to use impact fee funds on those lanes. For State Street, those segments, the local segments under ACHC's jurisdiction, those are actually existing deficiencies right now.
They're what?
They're existing deficiencies. So if you look at the capacity today, it shows that they're over capacity, so we can't use, if we add capacity to that, we can't attribute those costs to new growth. It would be based on existing development. So those existing deficiencies we can't use impact fees on anyway. The intersections are a slightly different story because we classify those a little bit differently. So there's still some impact fee eligibility with the intersections themselves, but as far as the road segments, those are not impact fee eligible, even if we were to go and add new vehicle lanes there.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna, you'll see on your agenda, there's several action items. I'm gonna talk through all of them. And then, I guess if the group wants to discuss these at any point, we certainly.
Mr. Chair.
And then I'll give you some.
Just one more quick clarification, Mitch. So you said that CDAC, Mr. Wong said that we were going to recommend adding pathways, but I didn't see it on the last.
So, as a clarification, what he meant by that was the pedestrian crossings.
Oh, okay.
The pedestrian pathways and things like that aren't actually under ACHD's jurisdiction. So, I think his intent was to talk about the pedestrian crossings. So I'll talk through all the action items, and I'll give you a summary of them. Discussion.
In other words, we're gonna come back to them. You don't want us to chime in right at this point,
Oh,
right?
you certainly can chime in. I just, I'll talk through them and then I'll give you a summary of everything I talked about, just so you don't have to remember what I talked about, if that makes sense. But feel free to chime in if you want to talk about the individual action
Okay,
items.
thank you.
So first of all, the state system assumptions. The two on this slide are both funded and encompasses long-range communities in motion plan. So we are assuming them in the model. The first is State Street, widening that from Star Road all the way to Linder Road. And the second is Chinden or US 20 assume these state system projects just so we don't end up overbuilding our local system to sort of compensate for something the state likely will or possibly could be doing. There's a few assumptions that are not currently funded in the long-range plan, Encompass's long-range plan. The first on the left is the extension of Highway 16 from Chinden down to the interstate. There is some level of funding that ITD has to pursue this project, so we are assuming it in our. And then there are 4 overpasses that we are assuming. The reason we assume these is the underlying road network, or usually the mile segment that goes through there is showing a need in our roadway segment needs analysis, so we have to assume that these overpasses will be built as well. Those overpasses are Black Cat, Linder, 5 Mile, and Emerald. All showing, the segments all showing needs for 5-lane segments, thus we would need to widen the bridge to accommodate those. Now to talk about the ACHD system assumptions. We discussed this a little bit last time, and there was a request from the group to bring back more information related to the capacity of these and sort of the impacts of specifically to some of these constraints that we're seeking recommendation for. This first one is we're requesting recommendation to constrain Maple Grove from Fairview to Goddard to 3 lanes. Our master street map currently shows this as a 5-lane section. To explain what's on this map here to the left, these are volume to capacity ratios, which is the way we measure the capacity of our system. On top, we show the volume to capacity ratio at the existing 3-lane configuration. And the bottom number in that orangish color is if we were to build into 5 lanes, sort of that capacity relief that you would see. You do see some relief from building out this project, but the reason for our request is the physical constraints associated with widening this road. In the image on the sort of lower right of the screen, you can see the land that we would need to widen this to 5 lanes, and there's significant impacts to a lot of the houses along this stretch. There's 30 to 40 homes that would ultimately be buyouts. So just from both from a cost perspective and impact to residents perspective, we don't really see this project as feasible. The second of the constraints.
Wait a minute, whoa.
Sure.
So you invited me, you want us? In other words, we can talk about this now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
And I have a lot of concern about this. There, about us buying into this. Let me explain just a little bit. For over 20 years, the plans were that this piece of Maple Grove would be 5 lanes. And what's already been done in keeping with that, when we built the piece from Goddard, the shown in blue at the top, down to Chinden, this was a big fight. And we prevailed, and we got enough right of way, and we designed a section there to accommodate 5-lane section on the rest of Maple Grove. When they built the intersection at Ustick and Maple Grove, it's already built for the 5-lane section on Maple Grove. The intersection at Fairview and Maple Grove has already been built to accommodate 5-lane section on Maple Grove from Fairview down to Chinden. And all of that planning was based upon what you see, and it's reflected in these traffic numbers on the volume capacity ratio. And obviously you'd have to do a little bit more extensive study, but in driving that, which I literally did, and spent quite a bit, in fact, I drove it twice just to make sure I knew what I was looking at. It looks to me like at least 30% and maybe more of the properties that were developed along that section have already had their fences put back. When they put the fences in, they were put back at where the 5-lane section would be. And so at least those developments that were put in there were put in mind with having that accommodate that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily, but to my knowledge, in the past, when we said, and we adopted this kind of a constraint, it really bit us. The worst place where it bit us was originally when we finally got Curtis built, and probably 1998 was the date, maybe 1997. We put this kind of a constraint in there, and that's what we built. And it, as predicted by a bunch of us, it was over capacity the day it opened. And in less than a year, we had to go to the commission and we convinced them that we had to go back in there, rebuild it with a 5-lane section. And the arguments were not different than what this is, that it's gonna cost a lot of money. I don't personally believe that is a good reason for locking 3 lanes into this section, given that everything's gone before and what we know is happening in the valley. Now, with regard to taking off 30 or 40, I'm not questioning what they've said, but when we had a similar situation on U-Stick going west from Cole, it was gonna cost a whole lot of money if we built a full-blown 5-lane section in there. And so what we designed, the primary cost of the money in that case on U-Stick was because of Idaho Power corridor. Idaho Power owns the right-of-way where that main transmission line going down U-Stick, and it would have resulted in a sort of a similar to what's being shown here. We would have had to go and take off a lot of property on the north side. And that was accommodated by going ahead with the plans and putting a 5-lane section in there, including bike lanes, but we reduced the section. In other words, we deliberately made a decision. We wouldn't make it as normally as wide as what you would normally put in for a 5-lane section. And obviously I haven't done a study on what could be done there, but just cursorily looking, driving up and down there, it appears to me when they get to the point where it really is clear it has to be done, those kind of things can be accommodated. So at least I, for one, and I'm not directing what the rest of you believe, but if we are expected to make a recommendation, I will be voting that no, we don't do this. I think we should leave it at 5 lanes. The way those other intersections have already been built, ones that I cited, the north end of it has already been designed and built. The bridge, which cost us well over $1 million because of a suit that we went into, that the bridge that's across the canal right there is already wide enough to accommodate. That bridge was deliberately built as wide as it is so it can accommodate a 5-lane section. The section from Goddard down to Chinden, you can go and drive it. It's already 4/5 lane section. It's already been built in there. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
So Mitch, is what you got there a typical for the right of way in this 1.5 to 2 mile segment? Or, as Mr. Brown states, are there fences and right of way preservation for some of this? I mean, how much analysis
Yeah,
in this?
We we haven't done a full analysis on it, mostly high-level sort of aerial views like this, just acknowledging that there are a lot of homes and things like that that would be not just impacted in terms of land, but impacted in terms of the structures themselves, that based on the standard width we would likely mean we'd have to buy those houses out. There are portions where there is space on some parcels, but overall this area is pretty well built out. There's like Kim mentioned, the portion to the north has been widened
Sure.
up to Chinden. In the past, we had sort of planned for that 5-lane section, but just based on some of those property impacts and the costs and the impacts to homeowners, the recommendation we're requesting is to constrain that segment.
And then I missed our meeting in September, but City of Boise, what do you guys have a preference on this? I kind of defer my vote to the city that it's in for the large part, so I don't know where you guys stand.
For the record, Amberia Tuning with the City of Boise. I was briefly here last time that we met, and I think where Karen was at that point was that she was looking for some additional information specific to what could impact fees covered. Obviously, we've got some new information that has been presented today. So I think that would be important to evaluate, and as you noted, Caleb, I think it would be really important to examine exactly what those existing conditions are. How many properties would be impacting? How many of those properties have already dedicated sufficient right-of-way to accommodate for this roadway widening? What do those intersections look like? As we've heard from Kent, he noted that a number of those intersections have been built, and so how does that all interplay? So I would think that would be critical to look at. Without that information, I don't think we could make a detailed recommendation to you at this time. And I was going to follow up if I could. Do you have this information as a hard copy that we can be looking at?
I can send it out to you, sir.
Yeah. I just, for future reference, like Karen wasn't able to be here, it would have been really helpful for us to have this document ahead of time so that we could have looked at it or even been able to take notes, because we've seen a lot of information today, and I don't know if my memory is going to serve me well as I try and explain this to Karen when she returns.
Not to worry, you can see this whole video. It's available last meeting and this meeting. We are recording, and they are able, quick links off of our website to see the presentation as well as see everything that goes on.
So it does seem like there's this Wednesday, so we're kind of under the gun here to provide staff some feedback, if not formal action today on
So
these
this
bullet points today.
just to clarify, this Wednesday is just a work session with our commission, so there will be time beyond that to bring forward. We're not actually just planning to discuss these items at that time, but we will need to eventually in the future.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so if we want to defer action on any of these today, it sounds like we can. If we need more information or whatever for a future meeting.
Sure, I find that I don't have any problem with deferring it, but I would have a problem for voting in favor of it if we're gonna do it today. And on that, I can basically supplement what I said, or what was said. Some of those properties, when you go along, I mentioned, I have driven it and looked at it as much as you could, and they probably a whole bunch of people, I was surprised they didn't honk at me. I was going so slow, everybody else was whizzing by me. But some of those fences that are set back that I said, and you can drive along and you can see where they've set the fences back, that doesn't necessarily mean that piece of right of way has been purchased or bought. They would still have to buy that. The highway district would. Some of them may have been dedicated as part of the development process in some of the more recent developments, and you can see those newer fences, they are set back. So you'd have to take that into account when you looked at it. But the point being, on those places where they have set their fences back, then it would appear to me obvious that you're not gonna be in the situation where you have to buy the house out. Because it's already been accommodated in the way they position their houses. Some of them, yeah, some of them are gonna probably be very shortly, and eventually, when they do it, let's assume that we don't recommend this, and they don't change it from the way it now is, it stays five lanes. Then the part about whether you wanted to put in a constrained 5-lane section in there, that would have to be part of the study done at that time. That they should, at this point in time, it would be kind of expensive to rough out a design enough so that you could know what you could put in there.
So I know we've already moved past the first sub-bullet under the action items there with the state facility assumption, but to me it may make some sense to go ahead and just act on these one at a time rather than doubling back. I know you said at the beginning you're gonna run through the whole thing, but are you okay with that? Or does that make sense to the committee to go ahead and let's take some action on this, even if it's deferral or whatever we're gonna do with it now, and or not, we can go through the whole thing too, I don't.
Do you want a motion?
It seems appropriate if there's.
Sure, I'd make a motion that we vote to defer that, and we ask, the highway district to put, on this particular item, not the whole thing, all of the
Right.
others. But, on that one, I would vote that we defer it, and one of the specific things that we ask the highway district before we consider it again, to go out there and do some kind of a preliminary study, maybe with just the staff, to get some kind of an idea of exactly how many properties really would be impacted to the extent that they might have to buy them. Get a better count than what was put out. My feeling is it won't take that much, and to include an evaluation and look to the USTIC section. Look to the USTIC section to see, the USTIC section that we put in west from Cole is about the minimum you can do to put a 5-lane section in and still have all the facilities that you want. But it saved considerably from what a full-blown 5-lane section with bike lanes would have on it.
Okay, so I've got a motion to defer the first bullet under action items, asking ACHD staff to look at right-of-way impacts or study there and evaluate a constrained 5-lane section. Is there a second?
May I augment that motion slightly? And once that information has been determined, that the committee be provided that information a minimum of 7 days prior so that it can be evaluated and that staff doesn't feel put on the spot at that time, that it can really be examined closely.
Is the maker of the motion?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay.
I
Is there
second
a second?
that.
By Mitra? More discussion. Go ahead, John.
Hey Mitch,
Yeah.
can you delve in just briefly what the capacity ratios mean as far as 1.08 versus 0.94? Is that in layman's term on number of vehicle trips per hour? Or I guess what does that truly mean?
So, it's the denominator there, the capacity is the number of vehicles in the PM peak hour that could potentially pass through that segment. So capacity would be 1 point. If the volume is at capacity, it would be 1.00. So those numbers there with the constrained 3-lane, you do see it jump up above that 1.00 a little bit. So that's the numerator there is the estimated actual volume we project to go through there in year 2040 with the rest of the system built out as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Did you have something?
No, I just so appreciate that, cause I now feel like I learned something very smart.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.
So if I understood the request correctly, I'll go back to the state assumptions and do you want to vote on those individually as we go through them? Is that?
Why don't you keep going with these and we'll double back that one maybe
Okay,
last.
sounds good. So the next request for recommendation to constrain some segments falls on Overland Road from Linder to Locust Grove. Again, you can see those numbers based on projected volumes for each of the two 1 mile segments from Linder to Meridian and Meridian to Locust Grove. The reason for this recommendation is you can see in the image to the left, those big Idaho Power transmission lines. Throughout part of these segments, Idaho Power has exclusive easements on these. So our ability to acquire right of way or build into those areas is extremely limited based on those exclusive easements. So that's the reason for that request.
Mr. Chair, Mitch, this one is a little bit concerning for me because of the fact that this is one of the very few corridors and that are parallel to 84 and have the capacity to be an alternative in case of emergency. My concern is this just for CIP or are we actually eliminating 7 lanes from master street map also?
The request would be to constrain the master street map as well. So the ultimate build out would be 5 lanes rather than 7 lanes, is our intent with this.
And I don't have the map in front of me. What is on either side of this segment? Is it 5 west and 7 to the east, or?
Yes, that's correct. It's 5 west of Linder. And then the master street map currently shows 7 lanes from Linder all the way in.
Mitch, I think I would like to comment on this one. Unlike the last one, in my opinion, from my part, I very much support this because of what was just pointed out. That transmission line, in these instances where Idaho Power owns their own corridor, they're not putting it in the ACHD right away. Where they own their own corridor, if you try and widen this street, you have to pay not only to buy them a new right of way, the highway district pays for that, transportation dollars, pays for every one of those poles, and those steel poles that are that size that are right now are just short of $1 million each nowadays. The really big ones, like on the corner of State Street and Veterans, over $1 million per pole, and you paid for all the costs, all the lines, besides the poles, and for what it costs them to move that to the new corridor. You do that before you even start building the roads. So what I'm saying is, this just is recognizing the reality on that piece of road. And what it's doing is it's moving an ultimate 7 section, I guess it'll move it 2 miles to the east from what it now is. Yeah, it'll move it 2 miles. In other words, you would have, and then you would start a 5-lane section ultimately quicker, but I think this recommendation sort of recognizes the reality. And I don't think that you can fix it by putting in a constrained section, for example.
I guess I have a similar request or just question at this point anyways, because I do know at least on this Linder to Meridian mile, I think we've been preserving for the setting. The other mile is a little bit older, so on the south side, north and south side, I don't know what we've been, if it's been 5 or 7, but again, kind of a similar analysis to the last one. I'd like to look and see, because maybe even on the south side, we do have enough. If we were planning for 7, we've got another 12 or 14, 15 feet on that south side. I guess just another comment. we are at the city looking at Overland being almost a state street in the future, maybe not the volumes, but our land use intensities on Overland, someday we envision running a bus here. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna be a dedicated lane, I don't know that, but our land use intensities on Overland are gonna be some of the most intense in our city. So I'm sorry I wasn't here, in September, but I just have some concerns with this, but I don't have enough information at this point to.
Mr. Chair, I believe at the hearing, or at the last CICAC meeting, we did ask for the additional information and asked that we wait to hear from the city of Meridian because it was in their jurisdiction. But we also had specifically asked, was there an opportunity to look at the opposite side of the road to see, is there a possibility to shift it there? Exactly what are those existing conditions and what is that potential?
So you have to be here. You represent. That's great. So if you have that information, that would be.
So, we don't. The implications are, and I don't know, how, like you mentioned, Caleb, the Meridian to Locust Grove is pretty well built out. It's more than just a quick staff level study to go and look at, how you can shift this to the south, but that does also mean additional property impacts to the land.
There'd be huge implications in that mile, absolutely. And I just wonder even if it's maybe just the mile, it's weird because you don't want to go 5.7, 5.7 necessarily. That would be you wouldn't want that bottleneck. So that's kind of.
Well, I mean, getting back to I look at the capacity ratios now, there's really only 8% difference between 5 lanes, 7.
Yeah.
So if you take 1,000 trips an hour, let's just say in PMP, I don't know what it is, it might be overestimated or underestimated, that's an extra 80 trips. I don't know if the cost for that extra 2 lanes warrants 80 more vehicles getting through in an hour. I don't know what that translates to level of service, but to me that seems like a large cost for minimal gain. Like on the Maple Grove one, I didn't really look at the other one, but that one was almost like 30% on the northern section. That's maybe a little more significant to look at, but I don't see there's much gain for 8%. I don't know, that's just the engineer me.
I think as a land use planner, Mr. Chairman, my concern is that we are only looking at 2040 volume to capacity. We are not looking at the build out of the comp plans, and that's where I think we need to be mindful that growth is not going to stop in 2040. We will continue growing beyond 2040. So although the volume to capacity ratio may be better here, that's not the full build out of the comp plan, as Caleb, you rightfully recognized. Your comp plan calls for higher densities around this corridor.
Mr. Chair, just the additional information I think helps both the ACHG as well as the cities and the committee as a whole. At least we can, whatever determination is made on whether it's appropriate or not appropriate, at least we looked at all of the information as a whole and we made an educated decision. So I think that all of these facts need to be incorporated before a decision can be made.
Mitch, one more question for me anyway. So what are even possible, because again, I didn't look at this beforehand, but most of these properties are annexed and developed or developing, and so you've got whatever right of way is gonna be required, existing. Is there a way in the CIP to just continue to preserve the right of way, but note that we're not gonna construct anything, so those construction dollars are counted against it, but I'd hate to, leave. It's been 7, we've been planning for 7, all of a sudden we say 5, and then there's like 3 parcels and we allow them to build really close, and then someday you do need 7 and you've got these other buildings you're buying, so.
Mitch, I could probably respond to that a little bit, because we actually looked at, back in the 90s, believe it or not, they put a piece of legislation through the legislature, which
Piece of legislation?
Yeah, they actually passed a thing, which implied that you could, just a place like this, say, that's in our long-range plan, then put a line out there and in some way it would magically reserve the right-of-way. Well, it doesn't. And if you put that on, a line on there, that still, if a developer or somebody comes in and wants to develop a piece of property, you have to buy that property at that time.
Sure.
Even if you have put a line out, so that.
And I would propose that, I would
Yeah,
just,
right.
kind of to Scott's point, whether you build it or not, now that benefit cost ratio may not be there. The plan is still that potentially someday you're gonna build 7 lanes, but then when you get into it, you go, yeah, these are $150,000 a pole to move, or we don't have where to put them, or the impacts are too great, you make the decision then, maybe not to build the facility, but we've preserved so much already to now say, we're gonna go back to 5 at this point. It seems, and again, to echo, without that information, I don't know that that's the best action to take right now, but.
So Caleb,
Yeah.
if I can
Yep.
speak to your question a little bit, it's something we certainly can do to market these segments as something we would just preserve for when we can preserve. Now those portions where those exclusive easements do exist, we wouldn't be able to buy that right of way. But the portions on the south side or other, if there are locations on the north side that don't necessarily have that exclusive easement, that may be something we can look at.
Okay, any other comments on this one? Thank you. Is anybody willing to put a motion forward on this one?
I'll make an attempt.
Okay.
So I move that we table this issue and look at the right of way preservation towards the south side as we have requested last time. And again, we request that this information be provided a week in advance, 7 days in advance of the meeting, so that we can review it and come back with meaningful comments.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
You guys wanna arm wrestle over it? We'll take George's.
He can
Okay.
second.
Alright, we've got a motion and a second to defer action on this one as well for real similar reasons. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alright, moving right along.
So the next item, we're requesting recommendation for, shown on the screen, is the Cole Glenwood couplet. This was part of a study, oh boy, this was probably in the early 2000s, this couplet came out of.
Actually, Mitch, this was discussed when I was planning director back in the early 70s.
I was a little late on my estimate.
Several times.
My apologies. So, Cole going north, this is Mountain View, this sort of swell segment here. This is the existing configuration of this portion. There's 2 lanes going northbound, 1 lane going southbound. The proposed configuration of that couplet would be to sort of mirror that on this sort of extension of Glenwood down here and ultimately connect back up with Cole. So it would have 2 southbound lanes and 1 northbound lane. The requested recommendation is to remove the couplet from both the master street map and the CIP. And the numbers are shown. This is again for the 2040 build-out network. On the top, the volume over capacity ratios without the couplet are in the blue on top, and with are on the bottom in the orange. When we add in the couplet, it does add a little bit of attractiveness. So you see that volume to capacity ratio go up to the north on Glenwood and to the south on Cole. And you do get a little bit of relief here in this sort of immediate area. This is another one where don't really see the capacity benefit as enough of a benefit to keep this idea around, and our request is for the recommendation to remove this.
This is, Chairman, this is one that I have just some questions on as well. Nothing that's actually shown on the screen, but I know ITD has spoken with Garden City about concerns on the segment of Glenwood that's just north of that to State Street. And they're proposing looking at almost like a corridor study right now. So I'm curious if the effect of what this would do just downstream has been identified as well.
No, not that I'm aware of, unless Compass has already accounted for that in their, which I don't believe they have. That wouldn't be considered in these numbers.
Mr. Chairman, Mitch, I don't know, is there any consideration of what happens from Mountain View down to Chinden on that Glenwood segment? I don't know what's long-term proposed there.
This segment here, as far as I know, we don't have any plans.
Because that's pretty much a disaster now. I mean, the school exacerbates the problem. You just have to avoid Glenwood in the afternoons more than necessarily in the mornings. But anyway, so if that's going to stay constrained, I'm not sure that adding any additional capacity between there and Cold Road and so forth really helps.
A couple comments on this. Part about the issue that was just brought up beyond Chinden, I would assume that this, whether you build it or don't build it, the assumption in the models that if you run a model on this would be that north of Chinden, either way, the impact is going to be the same. They're assuming that the traffic will be there, and it'll just be closer to the volume capacity ratio. That is the ones that are shown in blue. So now, but on this particular piece, and by the way, this came out of the Risky River study, and this actual couplet was proposed by a citizen that lives right in that bunch. It's an example of where we took something that came out of the result of a study that was proposed by somebody that came to a meeting, and we adopted it. And that's where the couplet thing with 2 lanes to the south on the west, 2 lanes going north on the right piece, that came out of a proposal so that the people inside there wouldn't have to drive clear around saying how they wanted to go. And in thinking about this, remember the blue pieces that are not dotted, they've already been built for over 20 years. If you go there, including the necessary asphalt, sidewalks and everything, the piece that's on the north is 750 feet, I think, is what the sign says. And down in the south, it must be 300 feet. That's already been built. And so all you need is the piece that goes across. And I think that part of this proposal, I don't know, Mitch may not be, I think this is true, and he may tell me I'm full of it. But the big impetus is actually coming from Boise City, who's always been opposed to this. And you know, Boise City owns the parcel now that used to be, it's called the Spalding Ranch. Spalding Ranch. Anyway, so I thought there were good reasons to go ahead with what's in there, but I have to admit that it wouldn't change the volume that much. And by doing this, I suspect that you're probably making it so it will never happen. And so eventually, coal pole will really become a problem in Mountain View, but I guess that's a long time in the future.
Comments? Motion?
I'll move on this one, to postpone it, for specific coordination, of feedback, if possible, from ITD as well as the city of Boise, since they seem to be the two, entities that are affected, whether or not specifically, ITD, whether or not they feel that, this would interrupt work that they have with somebody, directly north of the company.
Yeah, I would second that. So that would be a motion to defer, right?
Yes, that's what I heard.
No. I second.
Alright, I have a motion and a second, any discussion?
How will ITD be brought in? Just is ACHD staff going to contact them directly, or?
I would think that would be the case.
Okay.
So you guys are able to do, Mitch?
Sure.
Yeah, a separate meeting with ITD and City of Boise.
Yeah, we can certainly talk to them.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I think this is the final of the local request for recommendation. This is just something that came up as a development-driven need, for development, needs that we're. And this request for recommendation is to extend, Deer Flat, from Eagle over to Cloverdale. This would be in addition to the master street map and included in the CIP.
Mr. Chair, Mitch, I would like to request the DIA that triggered the need for this addition to MSM and CIP.
I'm sorry, what are you?
I would like to request the traffic impact analysis that was done, that triggered the need for this addition, in advance of the next meeting, and I would like to propose that we defer it, because I don't know what triggers the need for this. The last one that I had seen in this area, I did not see the need for that, so it would be helpful to see the traffic impact analysis before the next meeting, to see what triggered the need.
Did you guys talk about this one in September? I don't see that in the minutes.
It's a new addition, so this was a new addition, right?
This was presented last time as
Okay.
well. This was on the list of action items that would be considered this week.
George, you represent CUNA, aren't you their citizen rep?
And this is,
Did
yeah,
you get a chance to talk with them? Are you familiar with this at all?
I have not, having lived in the area for 23 some years, I'm surprised that road has not gone through all the way sooner. Because there's a lot of, growth that's occurring out in that area now. Can attest to that. It's just growing. There's breaking ground for new subdivisions almost every week in that area, and a lot of it's in that between Meridian Road and Cloverdale. So, I definitely see right now to get around in that area is pretty convoluted. There's no direct access unless you go to Cunamore Road or you go Columbia to really get into that area easily. You can see to get that kind of an L-shaped jog there, which is almost hazardous at times. So having something that would go straight through would be, I think, a lot easier.
So, Mitch, it's kind of twofold, right? So you've got the last half mile or so that isn't, there's not even any right of way there. And then regarding the CIP, you'd be adding this, what is that, a mile and a half? About a mile and a half into the CIP? Is that right? There's no right of way, kind of the L you were just talking about, right? There's nothing, there's nothing further east there, so that would be.
No, I don't believe so, in terms of right of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is existing right of way back to the west, right? From, yeah.
Yes, this is all.
And then all of that would be included in the CIP is your recommendation.
There is a short stretch from Cloverdale heading west
Okay.
into a subdivision area there, maybe 2 blocks,
Okay.
something like that. But it doesn't go beyond that.
It's never really been envisioned for Deer Flat until now to make that
Question about
connection.
that. Was that section, the 2-block section that comes from Cloverdale going west, was it put in by the developer? Is that developed in there, and that got some subdivisions there?
That was before my time. That was there, as I recall, when I moved here, so 23 years ago. So I'm not sure who put it in at that point.
So we don't
Is it
know.
front on housing or is it a collector? Do we know if it's, I mean, would it be Deer Flat or would it Deer Flat need to?
I would have to.
Jog.
What exactly is it?
Well, we have a request from Ada County. I didn't hear it in the form of a motion, but we can simply make that if that's the request. I tend to agree with you. I don't know.
What is
Some
triggering
of-
the need for this?
If she makes the motion, I would like to amend it a little bit. To include it, and they're looking into to find out the section of road there, whether it was dedicated, whether the highway district has it by prescription. If it's an old road that they've been maintaining, then they have it by prescription. And they could be able to tell us how wide they have. And, that's available, they have that information. So we get some kind of an idea how much of this right of way already is owned that's gonna be in there. That all right? I make that amendment, you making a motion?
Yes, I think that would be all right. We need additional information on this one, it's a fair assessment.
Seems to be the case with these. Okay, so, I have a motion and a second. Did you?
A week in
Sorry?
advance, please.
Yeah, the same request, that if you can get it to us all at least a week before our meeting, so we can digest it a little bit. I think that would help everybody out. Any other questions, comments on this segment? Okay, call for the question then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
So that is all of the action items. The 2 we still need, some sort of action on.
State.
Some sort of action on, or the state system. Both the CIM's funded and the CIM unfunded. I'm happy to go back and show you those again.
Maybe if you wouldn't mind going back to those slides, anyone so bold as to maybe throw Mitch a bone here and give him a recommendation to.
So here's the state
go forward,
system
please.
at the top of the list, or the funded projects.
So this is the last bullet on the agenda. I'm sorry, this
No,
is the
second
second
to
to
the
last bullet on the agenda.
Yes, this is the second to last one.
Any more discussion on this?
What are we actually, just endorsing?
So we're gonna say, yes, we'll assume ITD will have these constructed by 2040, but only these facilities, right? Cause the next action will be the one
Yeah.
that they, well, won't. Besides Black Cat, I guess.
If they don't get them done by 2040, we're in a world of hurt.
Well, and that's part of the, what you don't see here then, are there any other state improvements that maybe aren't in the 2040 plan that we think would be in, perhaps some justification, because funding at the state level is not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, given the fact that this is all that's before us now, and with the understanding of process, I would certainly move that we support the assumption that these will indeed be completed within that time frame, if not significantly sooner.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
So the second set of state assumptions is for those projects not currently funded in Communities in Motion. Those being the Highway 16 extension from Chittenden down to I-84. And then the second set being these 4 overpasses that are needed based on the local needs we're showing on those milestones.
Any questions on this one?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve a recommendation that we include these 2 state system assumptions being unfunded in the CIM.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right, almost there. So next steps, we do have the work session this Wednesday, giving an update to the commission on the status of the CIP update. The intersection analysis should be completed by January, and we'll continue to determine the trip factors and new VMT and things like that that ultimately go into the impact fee calculation. I'm planning another CICAC meeting in March. We can work through that with Stacy. And then the planned adoption hearing will be in July of 2020. Is there any other questions?
I do, Chairman. I'm trying to wrap my brain around the discussion with the director earlier. And what I understood is it's staff feels that the idea of a regional impact fee, that's done, that's the recommendation. But is there still opportunity for this committee to comment on what goes into that specifically? So today we discussed pedestrian crossings and bridges. And I guess, we have that table C6 of the CIP. But when I look at that, I have questions of, well, why? In some of the instances, looking at state statute, for example, landscaping is specifically in there. And so how did ACHD come to the determination what is impact fee eligible or not eligible? I'm sure there's reasonings. And if we have the ability to look at that and comment on that as a committee, and having the background of how that came about. And then there's other items too, so where is the definition of project versus system improvement? And some of those things that we're looking at to help us understand what we're looking at in totality, or, for me, transit, I'm sure there's a good reason why it's not in there, but, that would really help a whole system approach if you have a good transit system, for example. And so just getting my brain around some of how Title C6 really is developed and the assumptions behind that, if we have the ability to comment on that. And that's where I'm not sure if we have that ability to comment either.
Mr. Chair. Going off what Jen says, because I feel equally confused. I guess working backwards, I feel like, there are times where you said that, like Maple Grove, it's too expensive to do that project. So we're talking about this threshold of where something's too expensive. And I know that is in some ways guided by the general fund budget, right? You have to pay for parts of those projects, so you only have so much general fund money. So I feel like it would help me if I had that explanation or the why. That are those things legally not allowed, or is it already moved to staff's conclusion, they don't want to include them in the policy? Just so that I understand that general fund obligation, how much of it is legally mandated and how much of it is just, yes, exactly what you said. I'd request an explanation for the exclusion of those things, including pathways, which are not on this slide.
So I fear that because we didn't get it here, item number 3, we could have answered some of those
Correct.
questions today. So the timing, I guess, then, I mean, Mitch, how much of that, if we're deferring Mr. Price's presentation, which I think will address a lot of those questions, how does that play in here to your overall, development and sticking to your July adoption hearing date?
Sure, so the impact fee eligibility, I guess just to talk about it at a high level, it is based on our legal interpretation of the statute, those items that are included, those items that aren't. There is some gray area, like we discussed, associated with the bridges, things like that. Landscaping is not in ECHD's authority or jurisdiction, so our legal staff does not really feel that's something we could defensively include as impact fee eligible. So to clarify, this group can recommend anything they want to our commission. The intent of the director's presentation to kick this off was that ACHD's intent and our proposed direction to the commission is to continue with the single countywide service area. As far as the specifics of every component of these projects, it becomes somewhat daunting, I guess, to establish the amount of eligibility or the amount of comfort with eligibility associated with each one of these components. But it has been vetted by our legal staff, and what was shown today is what we're comfortable proposing to our commission to include as additional eligible items.
Just to clarify, are we no longer being asked to recommend this? I mean, we have these components of the CIP, but the overall CIP, are we being asked to give a recommendation on that or not?
As far as
As far as this meeting or going forward?
the recommendation on what?
That the commission, I guess the CIP that's proposed that the commission adopted, are we going to see a final CIP that's?
Oh, yeah, we're a ways off from that. So
Okay.
the planned adoption is July, and we'll have multiple
There'll be-
meetings with this group coming up to that. And we'll continue to work and provide more information as we have it, going forward. So this is not the final meeting for this group for the CIP. The CIP is still sort of a work in progress.
The question that I'm grappling with, Mr. Chair, is this concern about being fair and equitable across the board for the entire county and its development community. And that's where I think I'm struggling to see how we can, as a committee, feel comfortable and what is the best path forward for us to, is it showing up at the December 11th hearing as the Director Wong suggested, or what is our best path forward, or are we comfortable with the recommendations that we have on the table is the real question that we are, and I am not comfortable not having adequate information in front of me to go down that path as Jenna had mentioned.
So Mitch, maybe I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit here. Can you, and I recognize we have a commissioner in the audience as well, but maybe just a peek behind what you're gonna present to them. That way we kind of know what's on the table for when, like your decision points. I know this all builds on, you make a decision and you build and you build and you build. So single countywide impact fee area or not, that seems to be kind of we need to understand that, and then you build on that. but we're not approving or recommending approval of the entire CIP. So if you can just sort of at a high level, give us a peek behind the curtain about Wednesday and what decision points, I recognize we're not taking any official action, just a workshop, but what are some of those things you're telling them you're assuming as you continue to work on the CIP?
Sure. So Wednesday will essentially be a status update. A lot of the information that was shared here, I believe all the information that was shared here today will be presented.
This is largely what you're going to be.
This is largely, as far as the action items, we don't plan to bring those to the commission yet anyway, so a lot of those were deferred. So those won't be on the presentation. So if anything, the presentation is a bit smaller than this, but down to about here, before we got into the action items, that's essentially what we'll be sharing with our commission on Wednesday.
Okay, so those aren't listed as action items, but I'm gonna kind of interpret what Director Wong said in the discussion here. So if we have any comments on those things, even though they're not listed as action items, we certainly can put forward some comments to the commission if we have concerns with what is being presented to ACHD, or as an individual, you can show up at noon and represent. So yeah, Christine.
So we clarify that this is a work session and it's the director said we don't want to.
Yep. Testimony. Sorry. Thank you.
So I just didn't want to give you.
Yep. So probably the best avenue then is if there's anything we as a committee want to recommend, we can do that. Staff can carry that forward, and I get that they're gonna have their staff recommendation, but they could wear the hat of your CIC recommends this. We as staff don't necessarily recommend that potentially, but if there's another action we wanna take, it does seem like there's potential there anyways. If not, that is the end of our agenda.
I have just one other question or comment. On the agenda items, it was mentioned several times, getting information ahead of the meeting. I'm just wondering, I think maybe it was a July meeting, there were links to the action items where we were able to access the slides ahead of the meeting. I'm just wondering going forward if that could be a practice to give us an opportunity to review and come prepared with questions. That way we're not taking so much time to discuss the materials.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess I would make a motion that we formally request that. I think it's in the bylaws to have the agenda ahead of time, but maybe actually active links to the action items.
That seems good. I don't know if we need a motion necessarily,
Yeah,
but if that's something.
Well, just that
Not
it's.
opposed to it.
No, yeah, I just wanna make sure it's reflected in the minutes. I think that's, when I look at the minutes, they're not always clear exactly about what was discussed or what was asked for, so I don't know if it's better to do that by a motion or have it reflected in the minutes, but.
I would prefer motion,
Okay.
because a lot of times you guys have a lot of discussion,
Sure.
and what is necessarily an opinion of one committee member is not the opinion of the committee as a whole.
Sure.
You make it a motion, the motion will be definitely reflected on the minutes, and those are things that we can make sure that.
Okay. Well, yeah, then I guess I'd make a motion that the action items be provided to the committee ahead of the meeting as linkable documents. 1 week in advance.
Second that.
Any discussion on that? I guess the only comment I would have, and maybe this is for our March meeting, maybe look at our bylaws too and just include that in the bylaws as a standing practice or whatever. I'm not familiar with that section you just read, but that seems to make some sense just to memorialize it and say, when you can, include that information at least a week in advance with hyperlinks in an email or whatever. But I like the motion too. Any other comments? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Squirtle, second?
I want to second something.
Yeah, second, duly noted, and everyone's in favor of that one, so thank you all. See you in March.
Well, we need a vote, so we need to provide this information and get recommendations prior to